Thank you. Have you ever noticed that Catholics have better jokes than Protestants? No? Yeah, it's weird is most jokes that have religion or Christianity or the Bible involved are like Catholic in their orientation. And they actually don't make a lot of sense sometimes. One of the reasons Protestants don't tell a lot of jokes about that sort of thing is because, we don't have saints, right? Or if we don't believe certain things about, say, Mary or the pearly gates in heaven or priests have special powers or whatever it is. It's tough to joke unless you have something really firm, right? Like an institutional certainty. That's how you are able to joke, is because you have something to push on. That's what a joke is, right? It's calling out the inconsistencies or the uneven parts. And I have a theory that because Protestantism is sort of an evolving faith, and it has changed so much over the centuries, it's not firm enough, it's too fluid to push against, and so it's not funny. This is a theory that I'm working on. If you don't have something to push against that's rock solid, it's tough to joke. For instance, does anybody know a good Jesus joke? Anybody have a Jesus joke in your back pocket this morning? No, it's actually, you have a good one?
I have
a cartoon?
It's a Christmas tree.
Okay.
And all of the disciples are there, and they jump out at Jesus and say, surprise,
Oh, you got a good laugh there. All right. Great. All right, good. Well, I'm glad somebody had a Jesus joke. I don't hear a lot of Jesus jokes among Protestants. It's like, there's just an odd thing. But one of the problems is I've noticed that in our lack of joking, part of it is because there's this odd sort of, not superstitious, but this reverence where we don't know what to do with Jesus' humanity. And any jokes that we would make, in most of our jokes, would be about anything like humans have that are flawed or mistakes they make, right? Or that Jesus had lice, or that he would have had diarrhea sometimes, or something like that. And then people don't know how to sort of address the humanity, and so they just leave it alone. In fact, the only real Protestant joke I know is, the definition of Puritans? Do you know the definition of Puritans? It's the fear that somebody somewhere is having fun and you're upset about it. So, it's sort of humorous. It's not even that good of a joke, and it's the only Protestant joke I know. Yo, you got one.
I just remembered one. What would Jesus drive?
Yeah?
It would be a Honda, because all the apostles were in one accord. Yeah.
Oh, God bless you. Oh my goodness. That was rough. Well, I hope I can recover from that. One of the things I think we have the opportunity to talk about today in stories like this is we don't have that many stories of Jesus as an adolescent, right? He sort of shows up on the scene fully formed, right? And as the oldest son, there's a really nice theory that he would have. We never hear again about Joseph, right? Mary's husband, Joseph. And so that Jesus is the oldest son probably would have taken over whatever Joseph's occupation was. People talk about a carpenter or a blue-collar worker, right? A stonemason, something like that. And would have had to care for his younger brothers and sisters. Joseph being nowhere in the scene, the theory is, that he had died earlier, and so that's why Jesus' ministry kicks off in his early 30s, and why it kicked off so late is because he had these earthly responsibilities. It's sort of fun to think about. In fact, this is one of the only stories we have of Jesus before the ministry years. And it gives us a sort of an interesting opportunity to just think about what this would have been like. But I think this story is so much more interesting if you really embrace the humanity in it, right? So I just want to propose this. When I often ask people, especially around Christmas, and we celebrate the birth of the child, and I ask people questions, they seem to fall into one of two categories. As most things in our culture do, we provided these either-or options, right? And so people either say, well, Jesus was just a human, and that later these stories were attributed to him by his followers, right? But we don't need to get bogged down in whatever it is, because really what we're looking for is the moral of the story. And Jesus is our moral exemplar. And so it's sort of a discounting, and it's, in my opinion, really heavy on the humanity side of it. And then you have to ask the question, well, what's the big deal then? Why do we have all this hoopla around Christmas? And then you say, well, it's just cultural, right? And it's a very liberal way of approaching the whole thing, is to say, well, it's really about humanity, and don't get caught up too much in the divinity stuff, in the divine stuff. And I think there's something tragic about that we've made it too simple and boiled it down and sort of so that we can discount it, right? There's a reductive move there inside the liberal tradition that I think we miss some of the specialness about Jesus. But on the other hand, we live in this time where if you ask most people who would call themselves Christians about like Jesus, the first thing they would tell you is he was God. And there's something overly simple and unsatisfying about that too, because if you ask questions like, well, how did Jesus know this? Well, he was God. Or how did he walk on water? He was God. They almost have created a Superman character who crashed into Earth on Christmas Eve from another planet almost, is powered by something that we all have, like the yellow sun or the love of God, but it affects him differently. And even though he acts like Clark Kent, at any point he can pull back the flesh suit and expose the Superman divinity underneath. And it's actually a really weird view, because then you say, well, how am I supposed to be like Jesus? If Jesus is God, I can't do any of that. And we're left with these two really unsatisfying, and I would argue overly simple understandings of what is going on with Jesus. So today I want to present to you a third view. Now, having said that, I feel like I need to give you a disclaimer. We're an odd church in that you are not required to believe what I believe. You can disagree with me, and it's fine. Okay? I just want you to know that. But I also want you to know what I believe. And so I thought this would be a good opportunity as we wrap up this series in the Gospel of Luke and we transition to something else. And the week after Christmas, when only the most faithful people would get up on Sunday morning and come to church, I thought this would be a good opportunity for me to present to you sort of a different or a third or a middle way that embraces both the humanity and the divinity that we find in the Jesus story and what makes Christmas special. Okay? When we talk about Jesus, one of the things that we have to be very careful of is to not make him too otherworldly. If you actually listen to the story that Kelly read for us this morning and put yourself in his human parents' position, this is an infuriating story, right? There's so many levels to it that are agitating. First of all, he's sort of sassy to his mom, maybe a little snotty. Why were you looking for me? You should have known where I was, durr. You little punk. You just cost us 3 days. We had to turn around and come, right? I was worried sick about you. So his whole attitude, like, I don't know why, that would have been infuriating. But there's also in this sort of a barb at Joseph. Like, you're not my dad just because you married my mom, right? It's weird. He says, you should have known I would have been at my father's house, a.k.a. not Joseph's house, my real father. So that's a weird part of the story too, right? And so sometimes we don't know how to read those parts, so we just sort of skip over them and move on to the next chapter. But I want to sit with this morning, and I just want to present to you this idea and see how it sits with you. I think that what makes Jesus special, one of the things that makes Jesus special, and I would argue unique in history, we might even say particular amongst humanity, is not the origin story of the Superman who crashes into Earth right on Christmas Eve. That's not the thing. What makes Christmas special and what makes Jesus special is that God dwelt with humanity so that humanity could dwell in divinity. I'll say it a different way. That God took on humanity so that humanity could live up into the divine. The early churches called it theosis. The Orthodox still hold on to this position. And it's living in the tension of saying that Jesus was fully human and fully divine. Now, some people have said, okay, that's pretty lofty. It's a little theologically heavy. I'm willing to consider it. But I think here's for me, where the rubber meets the road and why it's important to get this right, or at least entertain this. What does it mean to be fully human? What would it mean for you to be fully human? I'm going to say, as a Christian minister, that your best chance of being fully all it means to be human is to open yourself to the divine presence. That is full humanity. Because Jesus had some, even from this story of 12, but we see it again in his earthly ministry, he had a unique awareness of God's presence in his life. And he ended up saying some things that you and I will never say. He said, the Father and I are one. If you've met me, you've met the Father. Right? Like, that's a pretty wild thing to say. You and I probably aren't going to say something like that. But here's what I want you to see in it. Jesus was so open to the divine presence, or let's call it the work of God in his life, that it actually began to compose his character. Jesus was so open to the divine presence that it began to contribute, to construct, make his character. This is an invitation. Every Christmas, you and I get an invitation to open ourselves again in the new year to God's work in our life, or let's call it the divine presence, in a way that begins to change our character, who we are, how we treat those around us, what we prioritize, how we spend our time, talent, and treasure. Jesus models for us not an alien example of some otherworldly figure, but Jesus actually calls us to be a different type of human. A type of human that is open to the work of God in her life. A type of human that is aware of the divine presence in a way that begins to constitute our character. That it changes what our heart desires. That it changes what we dream for the world. That it changes the way we imagine 2020 can look. When Jesus says weird stuff like this, like, you should have known I would have been at my Father's house, we can't afford to rush over it too quickly and think, well, that was weird. What's going on in the story is that being fully human is being open to the divine presence. That's how we become fully human. All that we're called to be, to live up to our full potential. It's not self-help. It's not a lot of effort. It's not just 12 steps, right? It's not just improving ourselves, but it's opening ourselves to something wholly other and divine. Whether you call it the presence, the force in the world, the force for good, however we imagine it as the higher power, being fully human is to be open to the divine presence, or the work of God is another way to say it, in a way that comprises our very character. This is why Jesus was unique in history. Not because he was from another world in an alien existence, but because he was born of a woman, fully human, but in a way that connected him to the divine presence and formed his very character. And you and I are invited into that life. That's actually what it means to be a Christian, is not to believe a certain list of things, but to live life in such a way that the very presence of God or the work of the divine starts to form your character. That's going to be my prayer for us in the new year. Will you let me pray for us? God, we ask that beyond wrapping our mind around some weird physical riddle of the divine and being fully human, that you would relieve us of all our anxiety and all our fear and all our hesitation, posturing and posing, and that what would become most true of us would be that your love has changed our heart. That love has opened us up to our fellow humans in a way that we see the good at work in the world. We make ourselves available in this new year. We open ourselves to your work, to the divine presence, in a way that changes us, excites us, inspires us, compels us, changes us. We open ourselves to this work and to the recognition of your presence in our lives, in our unfolding story. Help us to see where there is good in the world and then to join in and partner with that in a way that brings about greater human flourishing for everyone we meet. We open ourselves in Christ's name.